to engage with the media on a number of issues, including on the major issue pertaining to higher education funding and the crisis we find ourselves in yet again. I won't take up much time, but I'll just welcome Professor Zeblon Vilakazi. He is our Vice-Chancellor and Principal of Wits University. He started as the Vice-Chancellor and Principal in January this year, although he's been at Wits since around 2012. Professor Vilakazi will do a short briefing with us for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'd really like to allow more time for questions and answers from the media. We have about 40 participants or so, so if you could please put your questions into the chat. We will try to take live questions as well from the media after the 5 to 7 minute briefing. I'll hand over to Professor Vilakazi now to kick off the conference, and we'll take it from there. Just 2 housekeeping rules. Firstly, if everyone could just mute your mics and your cameras for now while the briefing commences, and we can turn them back on when it's time to chat and go into the Q&A session thereafter. So over to you, Professor Vilakazi.
Good morning. Thank you, Sharona and the Wits team, and also to the press corps for making themselves available at such a short notice for me to share with you the view of the situation that we find ourselves at, not as a university, but as a country as a whole. I've met many of you on the 26th, after the 26th of June last year, when I was assuming the role of the Vice-Chancellor. I was then designated. And of course, those are different circumstances. But nonetheless, what hasn't changed is that this university will go through this current challenge and emerge stronger. And we hope that the national system of higher education, which is very crucial for the passing of knowledge to the next generation, is managed in a sustainable and enduring manner that ensures that these institutions, this one in particular, does not only survive the next 10, 15 years, even 100 years in this next century, but beyond, because universities, as I mentioned earlier, are among the most resilient institutions that face all the vicissitudes of the current times, but they have the stamina and the resilience to endure for thousands of years. Now, the point I'm trying to illustrate this is that obviously I'm the first Vice-Chancellor to arrive within 6 weeks of being in the office, trying to clear my files, landed to the crisis. I was trying to even find my way around the university. But I think that presents an opportunity to rethink how we manage situations and help in crafting the national narrative around, the fee issue in particular and the sustainability of the academic project. I think there are 3 things I want to highlight, then I will leave it to members of the corps to ask me some questions. We are currently sitting at around 1 billion rand of student debt in the university, which has doubled from 2017, more than doubled rather. At the time it was at around 450 million rand. Now we are sitting at 1 billion rand. That is a debt ceiling beyond which we cannot sustain a brighter future for the university. Vice-Chancellors come and go, students come and go, but we need to ensure that this university endures, to repeat what I said earlier, that the next generation and the next generation of children who will study here, post our time, inherit a world-class global university that has shown itself to be in the lead of tackling some of the pandemics we faced, including this one. So it behoves the leadership of this institution to manage that in a sustainable way whilst addressing some of the issues around students. I will answer specific questions regarding the details, but for now I thought I would just give you my high-level vision of how I see this university as one of very few world-class universities of the Global South that can help us tackle big issues of the day. So I think with that, Chair, I'll hand over to you to address things more specifically. Oh, but before I do that, I'd like to also say that I was obviously disheartened at the level of escalation that played itself out in the Braamfontein Central Business District with the sad loss of a bystander who lost his life yesterday in that situation. And I think my condolences go to the bereaved, and I look forward to having a discussion with the Student Representative Council on how we can arrive at this at a solution and de-escalate the problem.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Do you just want to share some information on the higher education funding crisis that we're finding ourselves in? Perhaps just what's happened since 2015 and 2016 up until now, and what are possibilities for the way going forward in the future?
Okay, the higher education crisis, I mean, has been there since almost decades now. And also, before I answer that, Sharona, I want to make clear that this is not a South African problem, right? It's a global problem. If we think of student debt in the United States, the latest economics numbers I picked up in the Economist magazine says that US student debt is about $2 trillion US. So if you were to compare that with our GDP, you see that with debt that is, almost 20 times bigger than the entire economy. So that is the national and global problem we face. Nationally, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a Wits crisis, it's a national crisis of sustainable funding and support for students. There have been interventions in the past, like the National Financial Aid Scheme, that really has covered some ground in supporting students that are below a particular, also whose family incomes are below a particular level, that is below 350,000 per year. They get funded through a NSFAS scheme, which the university is working with the national government or the NSFAS agency to bridge where appropriate. Like this year in particular, Wits gave upfront funding of 300 million just to allow students who haven't received their national financial aid scheme from the government to just register with us. And that's a point I want to also emphasize as well. And however, the biggest challenge we face is those that are called, the missing middle students who are too rich to qualify and too poor to afford. And then too poor to pay. Too rich to qualify for NSFAS and too poor to pay. And there's a range of those. We have systematically been working on managing that number, and that's where the large bulk of the student debt resides. On our database, just to clarify the point, we have around 6,000, the range of 6,000 and 7,000 students who, to correct, are not going to be excluded, but they are part of what we consider within the basket of in-risk. And that number is changing. It's not a number that is fixed. Among others, you've got those that actually have, lost their scholarship because they failed repeatedly, and then they don't qualify for both NSFAS and their own scholarships through various companies. And others are those that owe within a certain amount of money that we are working through to make sure that you draw down that number. Now, as of the end of yesterday, 95% of our students have been registered. So we have had 1,200 applications for assistance, of which 750 have been registered. That's almost close to 70% of those that have been registered. And we are working on systematically working through that number on a case-by-case basis to ensure that whilst addressing that particular pressure of students, we do not take decisions that imperil the sustainability of the university. And that to me is how, at least at Wits, we can solve this problem as it manifests itself. But by and large, as I've said earlier, that it is a national crisis. This manifestation at Wits is we get whatever resources we can to minimize the impact of this global crisis, which has been with us, in particular, showed its face in 2015-16.
Thanks, VC. And then just to clarify, that 6,000 to 7,000, the SLC has been putting out numbers saying 6,000 to 7,000 students are at risk of being financially excluded. Just to put in context that these are the 6,000 to 7,000 people who owe the university money, who have ever owed the university money over the last 7 years. And as you explained, it's made up of a number of people, some who've dropped out, some who were academically excluded, some who lost their bursaries and funding, and some who are genuinely, who cannot afford to pay their own way. Thanks for touching on the missing middle questions as well. And then could you perhaps just share with the media what Wits has done? You're saying that 95% of students have registered. We know that online learning is continuing this week. We've had about more than 25,000 students log on this week onto the online learning platforms. And the academic programs going ahead in that regard. But we've also extended registration. Could you just touch on that a little bit?
Yes. First, in my last meeting I had with my team, with the SRC executive, we, so excuse me, I've been talking a lot this morning. Apologies. The last meeting we had with the SRC, which was, I think, on Tuesday, was that I actually, in consultation with the CFO, put forward what I would call a special relief COVID fund, a once-off vice-chancellor's COVID relief fund of 10 million rand, and that's on top of the 17 million rand we put for the hardship as a once-off, noting that, you know, some students and have parents who have during this last year fallen through the hard times. So that is actually our unbudgeted extraordinary relief effort that we thought would help ameliorate the situation. And we have extended also to allow for the numbers of students, the remaining number of students who have not yet registered at both undergraduate and postgraduate. We've extended undergraduate enrollment to the 17th of March and postgraduate to the 12th of March.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. We'll now move on to the Q&A session. There is all these statistics and facts and figures are available on the Wits website. The number of students who are registered, the number of students that we assist through financial aid scholarships and bursaries, which amounts to more than R1 billion a year, the amount that Wits has committed through different funds to assist students, and the number of students who have been registered. So all these facts and figures are available on the Wits website as we speak. I will post the link in the chat as well. Let's move directly into the Q&A session. I know that we've got about 45 minutes left, and I think it would be useful to just hear from the media directly, as is the purpose of this media conference. We know that the minister will be having a conference at 11 o'clock today, a press conference, which many of the media would want to join as well. We know that they will be touching on issues related to NSFAS and financial aid, scholarships and bursaries. I'll start with the one question that has come through the Q&A session. It's from Tabiso Lehoko from Sputnik News. And he says that SASCO has threatened to make institutions ungovernable. Should these protests continue and funding remains a problem, how will the university respond? Because learning has to continue.
I think that obviously following yesterday's unfortunate events due to the escalation, it is the moment as South Africans, as the members of the university community, just to tone down the rhetoric and try to ensure that we do not allow the situation to escalate further. I would like to appeal to all members of the community, both within and outside the broader university society, the national system, just to allow for cool heads to prevail. In a fog of conflict, if I can use that word to describe the current situation we find ourselves with, is that there is a lot of emotions and there's a fog and there's heat. I'd request that all of us collectively, including the management of all universities, just to have at least more light, less heat, because we need to arrive at some stage at finding a solution that is lasting for the entire system, that will obviously be dependent on the policymakers in the department on how they manage and help us with the situation. The Vice-Chancellor's powers are limited within the perimeter of the university and the council-approved budget.
Thanks, Vice-Chancellor. The next question is from the Voice of Wits FM. It's Karabo Tebele, and Karabo asks, why did it take the university until yesterday to respond to the students? Perhaps you can elaborate on whether the university has been engaging with students, and if so, what were the nature of those engagements?
Yes, I want to correct one point without, of course, turning this into a discussion about, the management of that said, and as I said, I think that would be not appropriate at this level, but I'm just going to put facts on the ground here. Is that number one, since I joined the university at the beginning of last year, or even by early as last year, when the lockdown regulations eased, I did a lot of walking about on campus, trying to hear from students. Some of them were exiting SRC members, and some were incoming SRC members. We had an induction. So there's been a series of conversation on a one-to-one bilateral between myself and the leadership, and also with members of my senior executive team. Since I joined the office at the beginning of January, when I assumed the role of the VC, the dean was assigned as a representative whose assignment is to look after student affairs, to start a conversation and deal with some of the requests and demands that the students have made. That was followed by a team that I established of senior executive team members to meet with the SRC. And I think to this day, we've met almost 8 times. At the last meeting, as I repeat, that I was at last week, that's when I actually, as a means of finding a solution to prevent this from happening, given our limited resources, was that special 10 million rand COVID fund and the extension of registration. So all these other concessions that have come along the way have been because of a result of what we can afford, what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. So we have been meeting the SRC throughout this period. And finally, on Monday, I tried to reach out to the Tuesday night, before this, to the SRC president, to have a one-on-one with him and get his team to come in and meet us. And that is something that the dean, we were meant to have met them yesterday, but there was this incident. And today we are having another meeting. We are always reaching out to talk to them and find out how we can agree. And there are things that we cannot all agree on. And I think that is the reality.
Okay, thanks, VC. So following on from that, Hello asks, did the university genuinely believe that the large-scale deployment of heavily armed paramilitary and police personnel was the best response, as opposed to, say, a dialogue with students? Like, did you think that the students could be beaten and shot into submission, particularly considering that this kind of protests have been occurring year after year? And this repression has never worked in solving them. So it's quite a loaded question, but basically, I think the three points you have to, that they're asking for is, was the deployment of heavily armed people, firstly on campus, if you could comment on that, and then did you have any say? Did you have any say in the police and what they did yesterday? Did you ask them to be deployed yesterday?
Yes, the answer for the last one is simple. I'll answer the question in reverse order. On the police deployment, I want to put it on record that I wish the Vice-Chancellor, I mean, people assume that the Vice-Chancellor has got executive policing powers. The leader of the university, members of the core, is an academic and an administrator of the university whose jurisdiction ends within the perimeter of the university, right? Anything outside of the university is public order by either JMPD or SAPS, and that is out of my control. Internally, and that is the point number one. And I just want to make that clear, that even if I wished, I would not have had those powers at all. And therefore, the university wants to make it clear that there was no call coming from the side to do that, because it's not within our mandate in any case. We are not law enforcement officials. That is a public order matter. Internally in the university, first, I want to correct one fact that is not correct. these security members are not armed, right? No one carries guns here. That is not true. And secondly, at every start of the academic year, we need to ensure that we allow protests to take place on campus within parameters, within reason, and allow the continuation of the academic process. And that is something that every management of this university has ensured. And to this day, there haven't been any injuries on campus, as far as I can recall. They've all happened outside. So the university needs to correct that misconception.
Thanks. We're obviously talking about this year. I know we saw what played out, I mean, in 2015 and 2016. Akwana from Reuters.
Just on that, this year, no police were called on campus. Okay. There were no police called on campus. Yes, in 2015 and 16, because the situation escalated within the university, police were called. But within campus, it is just the normal, security of people just manning the perimeter of the university to ensure that there's appropriate access control and allow the registration to continue seamlessly.
Okay. So this year, no police was called. Okay, got it. Next one. Akona Machoba from Reuters News asks, how much of the hardship fund has been used to assist students facing possible financial exclusion this year? And how much money remains in the fund? Perhaps you can elaborate both on the Wits hardship fund as well as on the Wits COVID-19 relief fund. So that would be 20 million rand in total.
Yes, on the hardship fund, as I mentioned earlier when I gave the introduction, 17 million rand, which has been allocated. And last year we increased the number from 10 to 17 million as part of the hardship fund that is worked through by the SRC and the appropriate officials in the university who look at the hardship on a case-by-case basis. Again, this year, noting that we are in a situation that is abnormal, right? A special 10 million rand, 10 million rand once-off fund was there to deal with those cases of students who have fallen through, the cracks because of parents losing their livelihood. And three, that is on top of the fact that the university invests something to the order of 27,000 of the 37,500 or so students at Wits are on some form of scholarship, financial aid, or bursary, right? Some of it is Wits internal bursary, some of it is scholarship they got from outside, and Wits augments that. So that comes to about 1 billion rand that the university dedicates to this management of scholarship on a year-by-year basis. And then we have these hardship funds that bridge the gaps where the scholarship and funding officer cannot afford. And that is at this stage within the limit of what the university can sustain.
Okay, so that answers the next question, which came from Anastasi, which is saying the main issue here was around financial exclusion in the last few days. And that is for the university to ensure that students with historical debt are allowed to register. Does the university have any other proposals to resolve this issue, aside from the Wits hardship fund, aside from what we're already doing? Are you willing to negotiate on a way forward? Do you have yes, and also
the negotiation on the way forward is that, sorry, yeah, the negotiation.
Are you in a position to do that as the university?
Okay, that's sorry about that, Shirana. I didn't get that. As I mentioned, the university can only do so much, and in actual fact, some of the students within the university acknowledge that, right? That they are limited resources because they are cognizant that they don't want to be the last students to study at a world-class university. They want probably their children and their grandchildren to be here. So therefore, everyone is mindful of that. I wouldn't say, there's a magic bullet to solve this. As I mentioned, it is a global problem. However, I think you can solve it as a society, civil society, government, and the private sector to see how do we not go back to the situation that we found ourselves in today or yesterday, and the ones that we found ourselves. Even every year, there's been protests over this issue. We try to patch here and there, but we've never really found a sustainable solution going forward. And I think that is the challenge. And I think as part of my mandate now is to focus on that and see how we solve it. But I would be a magician if I was to say that I can give you a solution for it now. Vets cannot solve it. It requires the higher educational sector, all universities, all vice-chancellors, and the government to arrive at a solution to this student debt crisis.
So, VC, a follow-up question is, what would you like to see the minister speak about at 11 o'clock today?
I would like to, of course, my job is not to prescribe to the minister what to do, but I'd like to see him present a solution to this, at least give us ideas on how to present a solution. The minister sits with the budget, he sits with the cabinet, so they've got a high-level overview of the national crisis. So therefore, what I'd like to see, at least guidelines on how the universities can manage their fee increases through government subsidy, and also how they can, where they possibly can, support us in terms of appropriate subsidy, which over the last year has flatlined as well. Again, the government, we are doing all these interventions against subsidy, which is not growing at university from the state. So now we actually have to scrounge within diminishing resources to try to support students. And again, that is unsustainable. So I think I'd like to see the minister, if I may, just give us an direction of which route to take. And I'm aware also that, of course, on their side, the economy has shrunk by 7%. The national coffers are also, not there unlimited. So it's a tough question, and I've got no direct answer for that. But I think at least we need guidance as a university sector of how we can do it. And vets alone cannot solve it. So I wouldn't, as a vets VC, proclaim to be able to solve this crisis.
Thank you. VC, a follow-up to that was, do you think that the HERE Commission's report of findings have been sufficiently implemented from 2017 to date?
What is interesting about the HERE Commission, it was obviously before my time, because that was in 2017, and the person who was closer to the conversation in that regard was the previous vice-chancellor and some of the members of the commission and the University of South Africa, right? And that was part of my first assignment, actually, when I joined, is to actually familiarize myself with those documents, because that was the conversation taking place at VC level, awaiting the then presidential implementation. So I wouldn't be in a position to say that this was in the recommendation, but I know that some of the recommendations of this HERE Commission were not implemented.
Okay, thank you, VC. We'll take the question from Msindisi from City Press, and he asks, did Wits not foresee these protests? And how is the university now going to resolve this impasse? So similar to one you've answered before, but what's the solution for Wits University going forward?
Msindisi, I arrived again on the 1st of January, right? You're trying to find a way around the system. The first thing you do is you open up a conversation with students and say, can you help us solve this? One of the interventions we're going to do was through this sustainable SRC fund, right? And to try to raise about 10-15 million rand and so on and so forth. And then Wits did put 10 million, and I did put an emergency fund to that to actually sustain this. Protests cannot be stopped, but you just have to manage them that they don't escalate, right? And therefore, did I foresee protests? Maybe yes or no. I personally never thought that I would have a protest with such high escalation so soon after my takeover. I think I'm the first VC to be greeted with a protest, but that's part of, whilst I was still trying to find my feet. But I think we'll have to just find our way around and resolve this, because with this crisis, you need to find solutions as they present themselves. But I think, to me, engagement at various levels is very important.
Okay, thanks, VC. We're moving back to yesterday's incident. So we've got 2 or 3 related questions which I'll group together. Number one, has Wits University reached out to the family of the man who passed away yesterday? Number 2, we've had some Wits students who were injured. Are we engaging with the police and with IPID to ensure that a proper investigation will take place? And then number 3, what is the current situation at the university?
From within the university campus itself, for the last 3 days, things have been proceeding normally, well, under the circumstances. So as I can report on that, all these events took place in the Braamfontein CPD, and the university will allow the process, the IP process, to take its course. I mean, there are professionals who are dealing with that case. Once yesterday I sat through trying to get as much information as I can, because there was a lot of information overflow that you need to now sit down and understand the situation, and which is why I called this press conference to explain the first situation. And of course, the next we've actually sent out messages of condolences broadly around this issue, and we also have reached out to students of the university, those that actually have, the journalists that got caught in the ensuing confrontation through the Wits counseling unit, and so on and so forth. We are making all our services readily available for students to receive counseling and trauma counseling, and because they are deeper than even physical injuries. So that is actually our current focus at the moment.
Okay. The next question is from Dinesh Balia, and Dinesh looks after many of the student publications on campus. And she asks, is there a move at USAF level to ask for some sort of state-sponsored bailout for historical debt?
That's a very good question. Actually, I think that is something that USAF need to worry about. Whether the state will bail out or not is at a different level. And that is something that, I've not yet had time or left to take and engage with USAF on that, and see whether we can. That's one of the options that we could look into, or really look deeply into the implementations of some of the recommendations that came from some of the studies that were done, and see whether we can, and take a step back and say, how do we correct or rethink the implementation of 2017 that is more sustainable. Clearly, we've reached the ceiling now, so that will require dialogue. Maybe that the bailout could be one of the many solutions, but it's not the one size fits all that you can say bailout then you solve the issues. You've seen that bailouts don't work sometimes. So it's a question of how do we, as USAF, as the higher educational departments and treasury, work out the process of what can be implemented that is sustainable beyond just bailouts.
The next question is from Edwin Naidu, and he asks, what is your solution to eradicate this 1 billion rand student debt and to ensure that there's no recurrence of protests and loss of life and injuries? And more importantly, what is Wits's take on the unnecessary SAPS violence? Was anyone at threat to call for such action? You may have answered that, and Edwin, the VC, has indicated that Wits did not call the police onto campus yesterday, or does not have the power to do so as well. So VC, if you could answer that question, what's the solution to eradicating the 1 billion rand student debt and ensuring that there are no recurrence of protests? And then secondly, what's your take on the unnecessary SAPS violence?
Yeah. I think the one on SAPS violence has been answered, Edwin, that actually it's a public order matter. And we were concerned, and I think it's regrettable that someone died because of what I would call, disproportionate use of containing the protest. And I'm not saying this as someone who's an expert on riot control. And I think that the situation could have been resolved better. But on the, I did answer that one on calling the police, so I think that was addressed earlier. On the issue around how do you stop future protests? Protests at Wits have been there since the 1970s. Part of the Wits culture, that's what actually we have, is, there are many issues that will galvanize the student movement to protest over. Fees is one of them. Could be others as well. Matters around social justice, which will, which young people need to raise up as issues. Could be climate justice. There are many other things that are a cause for protest. So therefore, one would not be running a university of free thought if you don't allow protest. Because if you suppress protest, then you are actually, not stifling. But so what kind of protest? Protest must be there, but must also be cognizant of the fact that you cannot escalate to the level of violence. There's a protest and there's disruption. So those are the two things where you need to draw a line. Peaceful protests, yes, but disruptions that will not be comfortable to dealing with. The 1 billion rand debt. First is you need to arrest the debt. When debt has doubled in 4 years' time, then you are reaching a fiscal cliff, right? And you must actually just arrest the debt, which is why actually you said we cannot go beyond this point. We are starting a centennial campaign next year, right? There won't be any bailouts. We are starting a centennial campaign next year, which will help us at least have enough resources to fund all other university programs, because the student debt issue is just one of them. I mean, you need to do research that ensures that you are able to respond appropriately with things like COVID. So if you have actually taken money from one research pot, South Africa will never have coped, at least at a level of policy advice, at a level of vaccine development with COVID. And Wits was the university that actually was at the center of driving this project. So one actually has to be careful that, you cannot solve student debt just like that and compromise some of the core functions of the university that are of national and continental importance. At the moment, Edwin, let's just arrest the situation. Debt will always be there. You cannot remove debt, but just control it and try to, systematically work at reducing it very slowly. First, number one, go to arrest it.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. So it's changing tack slightly. We've got about 3 questions from Akona, from Mpumzi, and Msindisi around the academic program. So when did the academic program commence? Is it ongoing? Have there been any disruptions to the academic program? And do you anticipate if there'll be any future possible disruptions to the academic program?
Since Monday, the academic program has continued, and about 25,000 students logged on to a new online program, Canvas Ulwazi program, and that has been running since Monday. And some students, of course, because of their conditions at home, or cannot access data, or are far away from home, the home conditions don't allow our on-campus increases as part of ensuring that we do not allow this digital divide to create internal inequalities. So the academic program is continuing. At the same time, obviously, we have kept communication lines open. We're meeting with the SRC, the duly recognized student body in the country, and the university by law to engage with them further. So actually, we are seriously taking this discussion seriously. Once they, during the course of the day, the dean is working with them to arrange a meeting between the senior executive team and the executive of the SRC.
Thanks, VC. A question here. You spoke about the digital divides among students and inequalities. Has the university provided laptops, devices, data for students who require them? And if so, have those already been dispersed to these students?
You recall that last year when, especially about this time last year, when our normal educational activities were disrupted by the, spread of COVID, and then the universities had to be decanted, we were able to pivot towards online learning but we realized that about 5,000 students within our university, when they went home, they never had devices. Not they have data that we, those that live in homes with Wi-Fi can access. We provided through zero base rating with MNOs, the tech companies, for zero rating at 20 plus 10 gigabytes, right? That is the data that the students have. And this year we've also arrived at the same, more or less the same arrangement as well. We provided devices to those in form of a pool, a loan pool, 3,000 to 5,000 devices that are part of now our pool that we sourced from the sector. And that was also part of our intervention, and then data and loading of software that will allow the academic program to continue to ensure that even those that do not have the appropriate facilities working remotely can access with the same level of access as those that come from families that can afford. And in extreme cases, despite COVID, we ensured that we bring some of the students onto campus whose home conditions just don't allow for them to meaningfully benefit from this online learning.
A question on student engagement. So you've said that you've had meetings with the SRC. However, many other organizations have also submitted demands to the university. Why has the university not responded to all the groups who have submitted demands?
As far as I can interpret the statutes of the university, right? You can talk, as I mentioned, you can talk to other student formations, but you have to have one formal structure. There's one executive management of the university. There's a recognized labor at university in various forms, and there's also a recognized structure that is enshrined in the Higher University Act, and that is the SRC, right? Demands can come, the dean does receive those demands, but we respond to them in a way that actually ensures that it is aligned with the structures of the university. I think that is something that is, we cannot compromise on that to ensure that you've got appropriate governance in place. There is a democratically elected SRC. I might disagree with them, but they are a structure that I will engage with on this. There are student societies that deal with other issues other than this, like surfing society, chess society. Yes, we do meet them as part of the broader CSO, clubs and society engagement.
Thanks, VC. Another question: do you think that the university will go back to being a contact teaching university? Will you look at blended learning options? And if so, could you accept more students who can study online?
That is a question that everyone is asking globally as well. I mean, all times higher education and all other higher education authorities are dealing with that question. What is the future of learning, teaching and learning post-COVID? One thing that's for sure, we'll not do online forever. Online is not the means of fully online. We need to move to what I would call hybrid and flexible mode of learning. So we are now actually thinking of the future of education where we do both online and physical contact, because physical contact is important to create those networks that you need for young people to learn through peer learning. So therefore, I think there are limits to the online program. So that, I think, to me, is I see the future of learning as just something which is a mixture of both, depending on the subject and depending on the course material. And I think that is the opportunity that COVID has presented to us to rethink the way we've taught over the last 1,000 years, effectively. The one on whether we will be. We are a contact university. I mean, one must not deny that fact. I mean, the correspondence university would be, the University of South Africa. We are a contact university. However, possibly one of the means we can look into is to increase certain online streams for those that can not afford to come. That allows us to increase access. At the same time, we don't want to run a parallel university as well, right? A university of those that are Wits on the ground and those that are online Wits. You know, you got to be careful here. We are one university. So therefore, they made you say that we dedicate many, you know, for those that cannot afford online. I think you'll be creating a two-tier system that is not appropriate.
The last two questions that that I have in my list are around institutional culture at universities and higher education. How do we build a more humane institutional culture at universities and within the higher education sector?
I mean, I cannot speak for the other higher educational sector. I mean, we've got other VCs who are in charge of that. And I think before this unfortunate escalation, I was actually going through a process of of meeting staff. Okay, not meet them physically, but to actually explain to the staff the vision that we have for the university. And among the key pillars of this vision is institutional culture, right? How I can create an inclusive culture that actually respects and that pushes for excellence, but at the same time respects our diversity. And that is something that will be work in progress. And I've started that conversation with all academics, all professional and administrative staff to actually think about, as VEST turns 100, what is the VEST that you want? That I cannot say this is a culture I can impose. Culture is grown from within the university through dialogues. And that was actually what occupied me over the last 6 weeks to allow one, should I be installed as the vice-chancellor, the opportunity to articulate my vision.
Okay. We've got one journalist who feels that the question around IPID wasn't answered sufficiently. Will you be putting pressure on IPID to speed up the investigation into the matters incidents which happened yesterday, both involving the students who were injured as well as the man who passed away?
Of course, I mean, you don't want this to be a cold case, right? I mean, things must be done by the professional that are meant to do the job as expeditiously as possible. That is a given.
Thanks. And then one more question from Akona, and she says, the University of the Western Cape has recently taken the decision to financially clear all students to register this year. What is your view on this, and what is stopping Wits from following suit?
My view on this is not for me to judge what other universities are doing, right? As I said, that this is a national crisis with its own institutional uniqueness. As far as VEST can go, this is where we are at. Just doing something, because I don't know what actually parameters or data informed the vice-chancellor of UWC to implement that. Maybe it's got some, you know, so I don't want to actually copy-paste the template that has been used elsewhere. We need to work out the template, what actually works for VETS, and noting the VETS' institutional position as a global African university. What can we do in a sustainable way that, at least from the VETS point of view, will ensure that we address student debt, which is a national problem, and also ensure that the university endures for generations to come.
VC, so a follow-up to that, that's what we've got the last two questions here, which I can see we've probably got time just for the last two before people hop into the minister's press briefing after this. The first is these protests impact on the university, they impact on people, they impact on the institutional culture, but they also impact on the reputation of the university. Do you think that this will, that these kinds of protests impact on Wits' reputation and its ranking, both in South Africa and abroad?
Wits' ranking over the last 7 years has been improving. We are undisputedly one of the leading universities on the continent, and also among emerging market universities, which just came from the recent Times Higher Education rating, which puts us among the top 12 out of 200 nations from Eastern Europe, Latin America, the rest of the African continent, and some parts of Asia. So, and we are number 12 out of more than 40, say 20,000 universities in that ranking system. And obviously, if people see an element of instability in the system, it will, not reflect well on the academic reputation of the university, rather not on the academic reputation, on just the perception of the university. But in terms of the core work we do, research, teaching, and learning, that is not compromised at all. What we just need to work on is, finding solutions. And I would also end on this note that Wits, by its position, because of its standing, as arguably Africa's most central, premier, and now clearly important university, because the amount of spotlight that focuses on us are not only problems of Wits, but Wits is a lighthouse for all the problems that we face. And that therefore is something that I've learned over the last 6 weeks, that you're not only just the visual Wits, but actually it's actually the university that actually represents all the crises and the strength that we have as a country. And that actually comes with the position of leading such a university, which is right in the media spotlight. Whatever happens here, just generate the right amount of media attention, as it should, because of its history and because of its standing. And so, and that is what no vice-chancellor walks blindly into.
Okay, thank you. VC, so Karaba, I'm not going to read out your question again. I think it was answered, and the VC has confirmed that the university will follow up with iPad on the incidents yesterday and ensure that a speedy investigation takes place. So the VC has answered that one. VC, what's the way forward today? What's the way forward in terms of students? What are we expecting? Any more disruptions today? Do we think we are seeing that students are mobilizing both in Johannesburg, in Braamfontein, nationally, and online as well? So what's the way forward for today, for Wits?
We are opening up lines for dialogue with the student leadership, continuing and conversations. We need to work the problem. We need to, find solutions. They will not please everybody, but at least talk through the problem and then identify where the errors lie, and also, let people know what is the state of the numbers as I presented you the numbers, the real facts on the ground in terms of number of enrollment, the nature and scale of the problem, and then deal with it in a clear and concise, precise way without just throwing numbers thereabouts. We know what numbers they are. I've shared them with you. We just need to, as a university, deal with it as a university. However, as I close, this is a national problem. It is not the Wits problem. It's a national problem. Within the university, we can do whatever you can, but it is a national problem, as I've mentioned earlier.
VC, are you going to be meeting with the minister anytime soon to talk about these issues?
I've been in touch with the minister's got a press conference. I've been in touch with some of the officials in the department whom I've briefed about this situation. But I mean, it has to be done as a collective. So through the USAF, the University of South Africa, we'll await guidance from Professor Power, who's the head of USAF, to facilitate that discussion at the right time.
Okay. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, and thank you to our colleagues from the media. Thanks for joining us. I know that there's still a few unanswered questions. We're happy to take those offline, and the Vice-Chancellor has agreed to make himself available for interviews over the next day or so, if required, to talk about the higher education financial crisis. Thank you for joining us. This recording will be made available together with all the stats and facts on the Wits website within the next hour or so.
Okay.
Thank you and take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.